What if the world told you your passion was worthless, that the music in your heart could never touch a single soul? These words haunted Lorenzo every waking moment. Every time he played, their laughter echoed in his ears. Scholars whispered behind their hands. Musicians smirked with thinly veiled disdain, and strangers shook their heads in disbelief, certain he was wasting his life. They said he would never move anyone, never stir an emotion, never make a sound that truly mattered. Yet, inside him, a fire burned brighter than their scorn, hotter than their derision. Every insult, every mock, every dismissive gesture became fuel, forging a relentless determination. If the world would not listen, he would make them listen. If they could not feel, he would create a way for them to feel. Every rejection, every failure, every sigh of disappointment built a ladder for him to climb higher, toward a vision only he could see. He sat alone in his dimly lit workshop, the flickering candlelight casting shadows that danced along the walls, mocking him as much as the people outside did. The harpsichord in front of him gleamed faintly, its polished wood reflecting a distorted image of the man who had spent countless nights trying to make it sing. Lorenzo pressed a key, and the brittle, hollow note mocked him with its emptiness. Frustration coiled in his chest like a living thing, and he slammed his hand down, letting the sound ricochet through the silent room. It was always the same. The instrument lacked warmth, depth, life. It was like trying to pour his soul into a cup that refused to hold anything. He had poured years of study, of passion, into these instruments, yet the music he longed to create remained trapped, silent, unreachable. His heart ached, but he refused to let despair claim him. Every failure became a lesson, a whisper of possibility. Not yet, but soon, night after night, Lorenzo became consumed by his obsession. Sleep was fleeting, food secondary, and the world outside a blur of indifference. The streets teemed with people who would never understand his struggle. Laughter drifted past his window, mocking the silence of his room. Friends had abandoned him, tired of a man who spoke only 2 strings and keys, a man whose eyes were always fixed on some distant sound no one else could hear. Yet he continued, kneeling over instruments, running his fingers along keys, tracing the mechanisms, imagining possibilities no one else had dared to consider. His life had shrunk to the boundaries of that small workshop, but within it a universe of sound awaited, waiting for him to coax it into existence. He remembered the dulcimer, that ancient Middle Eastern instrument where small hammers struck strings to create a bright, resonant sound. Could this be the key to unlocking the music trapped in his heart? He experimented tirelessly, tapping tiny hammers on strings, listening intently as each note rang out. Some held a spark, fleeting but alive. Others shattered, discordant, harsh, empty. Lorenzo scribbled furiously, drawing diagrams, measuring angles, adjusting tension, imagining how a single key could carry a symphony of emotion. His hands shook from exhaustion, yet they moved with purpose, each motion deliberate, each test a step toward something extraordinary. His obsession had become a language of its own, a dialogue between man and instrument, between dream and reality. Weeks bled into months. The workshop became a labyrinth of scattered notes, broken instruments, and half-finished sketches. Dust settled like a memory over every surface, a testament to the passage of time and the weight of effort. Yet within this chaos, Lorenzo saw a possibility. Every minor success was a spark of hope. Every failure was a lesson etched into his mind. He imagined the music as it should be, alive, breathing, a vessel for emotion itself. He saw listeners far away, their hearts trembling with each note, tears running down faces, laughter bursting from lips, all drawn from the depths of the instrument he had yet to create. This vision became his obsession, a fire that refused to be extinguished by doubt, by mockery, by failure. Doubt, however, was never far. Whispered questions crept in during the long, silent nights. Why do you continue? Nobody will hear this. Nobody will care. Each doubt clawed at him, threatening to unravel years of relentless pursuit. Yet he ignored them, returning to his workbench, to the keys, to the strings, to the vision that burned within. Every failed experiment taught him something new. Every broken note revealed a hidden truth about the mechanics of sound and the soul of music. His obsession had become a symphony of trial and error, of persistence and creativity. Each moment a step closer to what the world had never heard. One stormy night, as candlelight flickered and shadows danced across the walls, Lorenzo struck the keys in a sudden, almost desperate flurry. A note rang deafly alive, resonant, trembling with subtle depth. It pulsed through the room, echoing against the walls and vibrating in his chest. He struck another, then another, and each one carried weight, intention, life. His heart leapt. Could this be it? Could this fragile spark be the first note of what he had longed to create for so many years? His fingers moved faster, almost on their own, coaxing sound from the instrument as if it were an extension of his very soul. He studied the mechanisms of the harpsichord and clavichord, dissecting their designs in his mind. He traced the hammers, strings, levers, imagining how a single strike could carry emotion, volume, nuance, power. The pluck of a string would never suffice. Eat, late, life. The hammer must strike, must sing, must breathe. He sketched diagrams late into the night, calculated ratios, tested miniature models, all in pursuit of a sound that could finally carry the music of his soul into the ears and hearts of others. Days blended into nights, and nights into a blur. His hands became instruments themselves, moving with precision, coaxing life from every string, every hammer, every mechanism. The room resonated with experiments, each note a tiny spark of possibility. Sometimes the sounds were harsh, discordant, broken, but sometimes, faintly, there was life. The music he had imagined for years was beginning to take form, fragile and tentative, but unmistakably alive. He could feel it vibrating through his very bones, coursing through his fingers, and igniting his heart. Lorenzo was exhausted but electrified, ragged, yet alive with anticipation. He had failed countless times, yet every failure had brought him closer. Every sleepless night, every rejected note, every moment of doubt had forged a path toward creation. The stage was set. The fire within him was ready to ignite. The world had mocked him, laughed at him, dismissed him, but Lorenzo's vision would not be denied. That would reveal the birth of his creation, the first notes that would make the world listen in awe, the music that would finally carry emotion, life, and soul to all who would hear it. Lorenzo could feel it in his bones. The sound he had chased for years was no longer just a dream. It was a whisper at first, fragile and tentative, but it grew louder with every experiment. He looked around at the scattered remnants of his failures. Broken strings, warped keys, pages filled with sketches and notes. Each of these failures had been a stepping stone. Now, the moment had come to build something new, something the world had never seen before. He could almost hear the music he imagined, trembling in the air, waiting to take form. The first step was his vision made tangible. Hammers striking strings with precision, keys responding to touch with the weight of emotion, a soundboard resonating with warmth. He carefully measured, cut, and tested. Every hammer had to be perfect. Every string must vibrate with the exact tension. He worked tirelessly, often forgetting to eat, forgetting to sleep. His hands bore cuts and splinters. His back ached, yet his eyes shone with a fire no exhaustion could dim. He was no longer a man creating music. He was a man birthing an instrument that could feel. For weeks, Lorenzo experimented with the mechanics. He observed how tiny changes in the angle of a hammer or the density of a string could completely transform the tone. He struck again, adjusted, recalculated, until the sound became more alive than anything he had ever heard. Each note carried subtle emotion, soft, gentle, but also capable of thunderous power. He realized the instrument could mimic the heartbeat of a human, capable of whispering secrets, crying sorrows, and shouting joys. Late one night, Lorenzo stood back, hands trembling, eyes wide, and listened. A single note reverberated through the workshop, warmer, more vibrant, more alive than anything before. Goosebumps rose on his skin. He struck another key, another note. Together, they formed a simple melody, yet it was breathtaking. It had weight, depth, and nuance. Tears pricked his eyes. For the first time, he felt that his lifelong obsession, his sleepless nights, his isolation, had not been in vain. This was it, the first glimmer of a piano. Yet Lorenzo was relentless. He knew perfection was not a single note. It was the harmony of hundreds of notes, the consistency of every key, the resilience of every string and hammer. He meticulously adjusted, rewired, tuned, and retested. Each evening, the candlelight flickered over him, casting long shadows. Yet he barely noticed. Outside the room, the world carried on, oblivious to the creation happening in the quiet of Lorenzo's workshop. Inside, a revolution in sound was taking form. He faced setbacks. Strings snapped. Keys stuck. Hammers misaligned. Each failure was a test of his patience and perseverance. But instead of discouraging him, each failure sharpened his resolve. Lorenzo learned to listen to the instrument itself, to feel what it wanted to become. The piano was not merely a machine. It was a living thing in his hands, and he had to coax it to life, nurture it, and guide it toward its destiny. One evening, he struck the keys and the notes danced across the room in harmony. They were soft, delicate, and precise. He pressed harder, and the same keys roared with power and intensity, yet remained perfectly balanced. A tear slid down his cheek. He whispered to himself, At last, the music can feel what I feel." For the first time, Lorenzo realized he had done more than create an instrument. He had created a vessel for human emotion. The night stretched into early morning, and Lorenzo's hands were raw, blistered, and trembling, but he was smiling a rare, unguarded smile. For years, the world had laughed at him, dismissed him, told him his music had no soul. Yet here it was, alive under his fingertips, a sound that could sing, scream, cry, and rejoice. He could finally shape every note, every phrase, every pause. The piano was no longer a dream, it was reality. The next day, Lorenzo invited a few local musicians and friends, cautious but eager to witness his creation. They entered his workshop, skeptical but polite. The room smelled faintly of wood polish, dust, and candle wax. Lorenzo motioned toward the instrument, now fully assembled and gleaming under the light. The harpsichords and clavichords of the past seemed like toys in comparison. This was something alive, something monumental. He pressed a key. The sound filled the room, resonant, warm, full of emotion. Heads turned, eyes widened, lips parted in disbelief. He played a simple melody, yet each note carried intention and feeling. The audience gasped, some leaning forward as though afraid the sound might vanish if they blinked. It sounds like it's breathing," whispered one musician. Lorenzo smiled faintly, heart racing. They were feeling it. They could finally feel it. The melody grew in complexity, notes cascading like waterfalls, rising and falling like the tide. Every key sang with clarity, every hammer strike precise. Yet human, Lorenzo's hands moved with grace, coaxing every nuance. He demonstrated that the instrument could carry the subtlest emotion, or the grandest thunder. The workshop was filled with awe, wonder, and disbelief. People who had doubted him now sat silent, captivated. Their skepticism had been shattered by the purity of sound and emotion. As he played, Lorenzo remembered every insult, every mocking laugh, every doubt whispered in his ears. Over the years, each note was a triumph over them all. Music that had once been dismissed as empty and meaningless now carried weight, soul, and power. Tears filled the eyes of his audience. Some wiped them away quickly, ashamed of the emotion they could not hide. Others simply sat, frozen, mesmerized, listening to a sound that seemed almost magical, as if it had a life of its own. Word of Lorenzo's invention spread like wildfire. Musicians, scholars, and curious listeners traveled from far and wide to witness the piano. Each person who sat before was moved in ways they had never experienced. Children gasped, elders smiled through tears. The world finally recognized the power of music that could express the full spectrum of human emotion. Lorenzo had done what he set out to do. He had created an instrument capable of speaking directly to the human soul. Yet even in the applause and admiration, Lorenzo remained humble. He knew the journey was just beginning. The piano was alive now, but it needed players, composers, and dreamers to unlock its full potential. He imagined orchestras, concert halls, and private rooms echoing with music that could make hearts soar, break, and heal. He imagined the world learning to feel in a new way, all because one man had refused to give up, refused to stop dreaming, refused to let doubt dictate his life. As the final note faded, Lorenzo's hands rested on the keys, trembling. The room was silent, except for the echoes of the melodies still lingering in the air. He closed his eyes, letting the sound wash over him. This was the moment he had dreamed of, the culmination of years of struggle, obsession, and relentless creation. His journey from ridicule to triumph had not been easy, but every failure, every sleepless night, every scarred fingertip had led to this. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a voice, a living, breathing testament to human perseverance, creativity, and emotion. Lorenzo's invention would go on to shape the course of music forever. Every note, every melody, every performance that followed carried a spark of his soul. He had turned rejection into triumph, despair into creation, and doubt into a symphony that would echo through time. And as Lorenzo looked around at the faces filled with awe, he whispered softly, almost to himself, "Never let anyone tell you your passion has no value. Sometimes the world isn't ready until you create the impossible."